Good morning, everybody. My name's Pippa Langford. I am one of the co-chairs of the Outdoor Recreation Network. It's just turned 11 o'clock, so time for our webinar on designing and developing outdoor spaces for women and girls. This follows on from our earlier conference this year on Action for Inclusive Access conference in July in Leeds, and welcome back to anybody who was attending that. I think everybody had a really good time and learnt a lot. And this follows on very nicely. We have about 180 people registered for this webinar, with about 90% of them from Outdoor Recreation Network members. So it's a really hot topic for our organisations. We have a lot of speakers for you today, but before we start, there's just a few housekeeping rules. Which, Elizabeth, if we can see the next slide, we'd just like you to bear these in mind whilst we go through the presentations. So during the webinar presentations, please could you mute your microphone and turn off your camera to help with the bandwidth. The webinars are all being recorded and will be made available online afterwards. So if you don't wish to appear on screen, please make sure you keep your camera turned off. There is a chat pane where you can make comments and ask questions. So I ask you to put your questions in there, because our chair for the conference will be using the questions in the chat to structure the discussion at the end. If you would like live captions, you can turn them on by looking in the three dots at the top of the screen under More, and then use the Turn on Captions option, which I'm sure you can see on this slide. So that's a little bit of housekeeping. I'd just like to hand over to my colleague, Louise Montgomery, Dr. Louise Montgomery, who's a senior specialist at Natural England. And I work very closely with Louise on this and other topics. So Louise, I'd just like to hand over to you, and I'm sure you can introduce yourself. Thank you.
Great, many thanks, Pippa. So hello everyone, thank you for joining us today. My name is Louise Montgomery, as Pippa mentioned, and I'm a senior specialist in the Chief Scientist Directorate within Natural England. I work on outdoor engagement, recreation and access with Pippa, and I've had the pleasure of working on some fantastic partnership projects. And these range from the use of augmented reality to supporting access and engagement with the outdoors, to how we can better support people with visual impairments to recreate in the natural spaces. And of course, today's topic, designing and developing outdoor spaces for women and girls, some of which will be showcased today and was why I was asked to be involved. So I'm very pleased to be here. I first became interested in this area while undertaking research on the impact of engagement in school grounds on children's well-being, their education and their connection and perception of nature. And working with the schools, teenagers and teachers who identified as women and those from marginalised groups often voiced their newfound interest in the outdoors through the school's outdoor education programme, but that they didn't feel included, safe or empowered to explore the majority of their local outdoor spaces outside the school perimeter. And this area is hugely important to explore. Green space access, engagement and nature connection are all key factors that support physical and mental health and well-being. And although this is widely understood, groups of people still face significant barriers to really reaping the benefits from accessing the natural spaces. And of course, this includes women, girls and people from marginalised backgrounds. So we have three fantastic presentations lined up, which will inspire us on how, if outdoor spaces and opportunities are designed inclusively to really empower and facilitate nature-based accessing and engagement, we can enable everyone to really support their health and well-being and encourage environmental awareness and curiosity to really support modern-day environmental and health challenges that we face. So we have a wonderful agenda lined up with 6 speakers over the 3 presentations. We're going to hold all questions until after all 3 presentations have taken place, and then we'll have our Q&A discussion slot about 12:10. So to start off with today, we're going to hear about some trailblazing young women from the Greenspace and Us partnership project, which is based just around Oxford. And so could I invite our first two presenters, Lizzie Moore from Oxford University Hospitals and Nafeesa Hussain from Name It Youth Group, to tell us a little bit more about Greenspace and Us.
And thank you for everybody involved in this webinar for inviting us to come and talk today. I'm a public health registrar, and Louise correctly said that I'm currently working for Oxford University Hospitals, but at the time we were working on this project, I was working for Oxfordshire County Council in the public health team, so I'll be speaking from that perspective. Yeah, hand over to Nafeesa to introduce yourself.
Hello everyone, my name's Nafeesa Hussain, so I'm the project manager for Oxford Youth Enterprise, the Name It project, and I'm also the project coordinator for East Oxford Youth Enterprise, so spend a lot of time working with young people on the front line alongside doing these other kinds of things that we're doing today.
So we're going to talk a bit about this project, which started in spring of 2021, and we won't spend too much time on that initial phase, other than to give some of our some findings from the Insights project. And I'm going to talk about that project to start off with, and hand over to Nafeesa to talk about where it's gone since then, and what all the young women who have been involved in the project have been up to since. Okay, so oh sorry, could we go to the next slide, please? Okay, so a bit of background and explain how this all started. So I've come into Oxfordshire County Council's public health team within the healthy place shaping team, and at that stage we had a lot of interest in access to green space as being a really important determinant of health and well-being. There was also at the time a really keen interest on the well-being of teenage girls, which recently had a health and well-being needs assessment, which found that in this group, as is shown at national level as well, there's a lower level of physical activity and nature connection. And we'd also seen in Oxfordshire a really steep decline in self-reported well-being around the age of kind of 11, 12, 13. We also knew that our young people were facing barriers to access to green space, but we didn't really understand exactly what these were, other than at a kind of a fairly superficial level. So it was really obvious that we needed to go and speak to young people themselves, and young women in particular, to find out how to take this forward and try and find some solutions. And it just so happened at the same time, we had access to some funding from Natural England, so thank you to Pippa and Louise for working with us on that. And I got in contact with Nafeesa and the Name It Youth project, who were seeing some of the same issues but on the ground. So they could see that these young women weren't getting access to green spaces that they needed and that they deserve from an equity perspective. But also there was interest in building a new women or girls youth group only for a kind of peer support mechanism. So it was kind of perfect timing. So what we did, sorry, could I have the next slide, please? So what we did was put together a proposal for a community insights project working with young women. And we did this as a partnership project. We felt it was really, really important to get a range of stakeholders involved, particularly people who had really strong connections with this particular population group. We decided that right from the outset that partnership was really important, that participation was really important. We didn't just want to ask the questions and expect people to give us the information and then for us to take that away. And we also decided that we wanted to use creativity to try and establish those relationships within this wider partnership group. So we created a team between the public health team, with a Name It Youth project, with Natural England, with our innovation hub at Oxfordshire County Council. We had a colleague from Oxford University who would provide that academic rigour, and then we teamed up with a local creative studio called Fig Studio, who linked us up with artists and designers to build a project together with these young women. And the idea was that we would build shared knowledge and understanding of the barriers that young women face to accessing green space, and then try and design solutions together. And we also wanted to present our findings in a way that were engaging and accessible to a range of audiences, and we'll show you some of the outputs from the project going forward. So next slide, please. So as I said, we worked in partnership. Part of the project was also to run a quantitative survey in a secondary school, which included both boys and girls. But the main element of the main focus of the project was to run a series of workshops with 20 young women. And these happened in a community garden in East Oxford, which you can see on the right hand side, which is where Nafeesa does all of her amazing youth work. And it's such an incredible setting for this group, because the young people spend the majority of their time outside. And Nafeesa will speak in a bit about the impact that has on the young women and their peer relationships. So next slide, please. Okay, so I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about exactly what we did in all of the workshops, but some were discussion themed. We also played a lot of games. We took a approach where we took the young people to a green space and let them take pictures of the type of things which they liked and didn't like, and to help us understand and discuss why that was the case. And then towards the end of the project, we started designing some solutions together with our creative team. I'll show you those in a little bit. This slide is to give an overview of some of the learning from that initial insights project. And I'm not going to go through all of these key points in turn, but we used a framework of behavioural insights, which examines capability, opportunity and motivation to use and connect with green spaces, so that we could really understand the barriers and opportunities that we had that we were talking with in a kind of structured way. I'll put a link to our final report in the chat in a minute, so you can look at those in more detail. But I just want to highlight a few things very quickly before passing over to Nafeesa. So next slide, please. So the first thing was that overwhelmingly there was this acknowledgement among the group that green space was good for us. When we went into green spaces, we really could see this in the young people, and we had things they were saying, things like green space is a good place for us to think and clear your mind. There's a very clear connection to mental health and mental well-being for us. And what we could see is that some of these young people who perhaps in other areas of their life were facing challenges and difficult circumstances, when they got into the green spaces, they, all of that kind of dissipated. And I like this particular picture on the right hand side is from a local nature reserve. And when we got in there, we actually lost quite a few of the young women up trees, which was a very stark contrast to when we were in the park, and they felt like it was a very different atmosphere for them. So next slide, please. So one of the key points we found that we had a lot of conversations was that the local parks that we have in East Oxford just weren't meeting the basic needs of the young women there. They wanted access to toilets, they wanted access to shelter, which is a fairly reasonable thing to ask. And this was reflected in our survey that we did in the secondary school, which suggested that bad weather was the #1 barrier to access to green spaces, and reason why young people didn't want to spend time there. So it seems reasonable to offer shelters and places to sit down in order for them to spend more time in green spaces and socialise there. The next slide, please. And then this was another really key theme, which lots of other conversations kind of stemmed from, which was that they just felt that nothing was designed for them. So the particular park, which was near the youth group, was dominated by football pitches. They didn't feel safe. They felt that the paths were designed around the football pitches, and even when you were on a path, you were at risk of being hit by a ball. The flip side of that was that they recognised that the play areas, in inverted commas, were designed for young children. There was nothing to do for teenage there, but they did want to play. They wanted to get on the big and what was sometimes described as dangerous equipment, like zip wires and big climbing frames and stuff, but they didn't feel welcome in those spaces either. The next slide, please. And as a result of this, the overwhelming feeling was that green space is dominated by other groups. There was a lot of talk for wanting a space which was specifically for women and girls, that was designed for them, where they could feel safe, where they could socialise, where they didn't feel threatened by other groups who were dominating the area. And these are just some of the quotes that we took from our that we took and put into our report as well. So next slide, please. Okay, this, I'll also share a link to this, but this was a manifesto that the young women developed with our creative team as one of the outputs of the project. And they've got some really key points about what they wanted from green spaces, how they can improve, and how that people can, of their age and their gender identity, could feel safe in green spaces. And we found that this was a really key way of engaging with other stakeholders to say, actually, this is what the young women want, this is what they feel, it's coming from their voices. So it's been a really useful tool. The next slide, please. Just to illustrate some of the creative process at the end of the project, the young women designed and built a prototype shelter based on this idea that they needed somewhere to socialise, which was safe, that protected them from the elements whilst they were in parks. And this shelter was actually subsequently built in a park in East Oxford. And it's such an amazing statement piece, not just for its functionality, but to say we are here, we're in this park as well, we need our space. Beautiful pastel colours that the young women designed themselves. Okay, so next slide, please. And that's it. And now I'm going to hand over to Nafeesa to talk about a bit about where the project has gone since, and what this really means for our young people.
Great, thank you, Lizzie. Can I have the next slide up, please? Right, so Greenspace and Us Part 2. I'll go a little bit back historically just before we talk about Greenspace and Us Part 2. As what we had at the end of our first 6-week research project, we had a group of young women, 15 to 20 young women, who were all saying, well, now what? What are you going to do with us now? We've got our vouchers for participation. We've been part of this thing. And now you can't just leave us alone. We want to still meet every week. But we had zero funding, zero access to funding at that point, and a group of young women who didn't want to let go of something they discovered. And one of those integral things being their voices, I think, and actually being listened to. They felt very empowered, in contrast to when I first got the group together saying, why do we want to bother? Young adults never listen to us. So 6 weeks later, we had a little group of young women who were saying, we want to carry on. Please, Nafeesa, do something. We managed to support the group to stay open through various trials of little funding resources, swing projects, whatever we could do to gain funds just to stay open. A lot of our time was meeting in parks. We were fortunate to get a few donations through. The group carried on meeting consecutively every Saturday, whether the local park or the Barracks Lane Community Garden. And then when we actually managed to secure some funding around the time that the bench and shelter was put in place, we secured £10,000 funding from Lottery specifically for this group, for Greenspace and Us. And County Council also approached us again then to say, would you like to do a part 2? Part 2 would be looking into if young women could design an ideal park for teenagers, what would it look like? So we brought the group back together again in the research kind of element. We were joined by Susannah for Make Space for Girls, from Nor.org, from Jessica Goodenough from Oxfordshire City Council, and again Oxfordshire County Council, and again funded by Natural England. So again, thanks to Pippa and everybody in their team for that. So this time we were taking the young women out more into the green spaces and trying to get them to actually feel their experience rather than just documenting them, actually feel the experiences outdoors. What happens when you're outdoor in green spaces? What are the barriers? What are you feeling? How are you relating your feelings to your experiences? And there were some very significant incidents in that journey. One of the most powerful things I want to express today, I think, to get people to understand from the young women's perspectives, was when we took them into Marsh Park again, somewhere we'd been a few times in Project One. Then we took them into a real, like, secure kind of nature reserve where there was no adults, no other people really there, just nature. And you could see this physical transformation between young women almost dropping the burden on their shoulders as soon as they stepped into nature. You would see them, as Lizzie said earlier, climbing up the trees, wanting to build rope swings, you know, just breathing and feeling we feel so much safer in this nature reserve because there's no one else here who's going to put us at risk. So feeling safe was such a paramount experience for all of these young women. I could go on forever about this, so I'm not going to because I'm conscious of time. The young women spent a lot of time thinking about what their dream park would look like. I don't know if we've got that on the next slide, maybe. So they were designing this dream park. They had kind of little ponds with nature features in there. One of the other things they were really amazing, and they were saying, you know, we wouldn't, although we're designing it as a friendly kind of park for us to feel safe, and we'd still want to be inclusive of boys, of women, you know, a breastfeeding corner. They were still, despite all of their experiences of feeling quite oppressed in society, they were still thinking outside the box for everybody to be incorporated in this design dream park. Can I have the next slide, please? So this is comes from a little kind of a zine that was created at the end of the project, as again one of the outputs for project 2, and it's just illustrating things they would like to have. Next slide, please. Okay, I'm sorry, I just got to find enlarge my screen. So what's happening next? I'm going to speed forward now. So they did design this lovely park. We had a celebration day earlier in the year where we called on local authorities, local people of interest, local community members, the Lord Mayor of Oxford. They all came down and listened to the young women. And I think, again, that was another really prevalent time for us, watching those same young women stand on their little stage that day, talking and demanding what they wanted, in comparison to the group of the same young women a year before who'd been quite nervous, quite anxious, didn't really want to speak out loud. So they really, really did make their voices heard, and it was beautiful for them. So again, this project came to an end. We are now in the struggle of trying to raise funding to build this park and get this park actually in place into Marsh Park, which hopefully will happen at some point. But the young women, again, they're still meeting on a regular weekly basis, and now they're talking about a Greenspace and Us Part 3, which hasn't been funded by anyone in particular at the moment, but their plan is for Part 3, what they want is they want to get their voices heard more, they want to be more inclusive. So their Part 3, hopefully by the beginning of next year, will be going into other local organisations, youth projects, and recruiting more young people, and either developing Greenspace and Us as a kind of a bigger body, a bigger entity where Greenspace and Us exists in Rose Hill or in all the other different areas of Oxford. So we're hearing from representation of all of these young women rather than just the ones in East Oxford, which I think is beautiful, and I think it's a really powerful statement of what these young women are all about. Can I have the next slide, please? Right, so I think that's the end of what I've got to say, really. I've summed it up. Is there anything else you wanted to add on there, Lizzie?
No, I think just to say that what the project has been really powerful in doing is starting a big conversation about who has access to our parks and who's using our parks. One of the things that I always find challenging is the speed of change in this kind of environment. But what I think we have been really successful at doing is really raising awareness of this issue and very specific aspects of this issue, and almost the injustice of what we're seeing on the ground. We now have really good evidence to suggest to show and demonstrate the inequities that this particular group are facing. So in terms of the response from local government and from our partners in the county council, district councils and the town councils, we're looking at various different avenues to actually inform policy and change policy, and work with partners when they're thinking about developing or designing new green spaces. So we actually listen to these people's voices as somebody who are, you know, just as important as other groups, and hopefully that will lead to change in the future. But yeah, big thank you to all our partners, and I can't stress enough how much Nafeesa has put into this. We're working with the young women, often with no support or resources, but to keep that group going and make sure that they're able to share their opinions and their voice. Yeah, thank you very much.
Thanks, Lizzie and Nafeesa. Wonderful to see both the projects presented there and pulled together. I'm going to pop a few more links in the chat from some of our partners' websites. The first one is on Fig Studio, and there's a BBC Sounds clip where the young women, you can hear them, they're voicing their thoughts and the process throughout the Greenspace and Us project, and that's really powerful to listen to. And then if you're interested to see the Zine that was developed in the Greenspace and Us Part 2 project, I'll also put a link up to that on Nora's website. And we will be having another publication coming out on our Natural England Access to Evidence page shortly. Oops, I've dropped out, I think.
No, you're still there, Louise. You're still there.
Okay. So yeah, another page of another publication will be shared shortly, and Lizzie's already put the link to the first publication there. So before my computer tells me that I've dropped out again, I'm going to introduce the next two speakers. We have Susannah Walker, who again was part of Greenspace and Us Part 2, but she's going to be speaking with Anna Barker from Leeds University on women and girls safety and parks guidance, which was released earlier this summer. So over to you two.
Thank you so much. Good morning, everyone, and thank you so much for organising this webinar today and inviting us to contribute to it. I think our talk hopefully follows on well from the fantastic Greenspace and Us project and picks up on some of the specific themes that were raised in that project around feeling safe in parks. So Susannah and I are both contributing to this talk. I'm going to speak for the first 10 minutes about the research that I led with a team at the University of Leeds in West Yorkshire, which looked at the issues that women and girls identify as important to their feelings of safety in parks. And we spoke to women and girls aged 13 to 84. And then Susannah is going to speak for the second 10 minutes to introduce the new guidance that this research that we did has informed alongside a wider pool of evidence and case studies. And we've called this Safer Parks Improving Access for Women and Girls. And it's important to note that the guidance that followed on from the research was created in a partnership with Make Space for Girls, University of Leeds, Keep Britain Tidy, which managed the Green Flag Award, and West Yorkshire Combined Authority. So if we could just move on to the next slide, please. So I wanted to start by setting out a little bit of the context, and we think it's clear from the growing body of research, the Greenspace and Us project, our research and wider evidence that women and girls are really being held back from using, enjoying and benefiting from parks. And this is partly as a consequence of concerns about safety, but also the other barriers that have just also been spoken about. And I wanted to put up this slide because it shows research from the Office of National Statistics, which shows that the problem is across Britain that women feel less safe in parks, unfortunately, than they do in other types of public spaces like high streets, residential streets, public transports and so forth. But it also draws into stark view the gendered inequalities in perceived safety in parks themselves. So again, in Britain, it shows that women are 3 times more likely than men to feel unsafe in parks during the day, and after dark, as many as 4 out of 5 women across Britain feel unsafe in parks after dark. And this means really that, partly because of this, women use parks less. So 37% of women in the same survey said that they avoid parks after dark as a result of feeling unsafe. And I think it's really important to note that actually after dark does not just mean nighttime in these spaces. In autumn and winter months, this means early mornings and late afternoons when women and girls are going to and coming back from school, work or accessing other opportunities. Times that they express that they wanted to use these spaces to walk through them, but felt unsafe to do so. Next slide, please. And I think all this has a significant impact on the lives of women and girls, as the Greenspace and Us projects have shown. based on safety concerns, women are restricting their use of parks, they're avoiding them at certain times or when alone, they're limiting their opportunities to socialise, improve well-being and engage in physical activity and exercise. And was also just pointed out that the impacts start early. So as we know, there is a drop-off in girls' use of parks, and that mid-teenage years are associated with a kind of break point in green space connectedness. So if we just move on to the next slide, please. So I think this really underscores the importance of engaging with women and girls themselves, as we've done in the other project, to actually understand what issues are important for them. And this was the focus of our research in West Yorkshire. So we used an approach called Q methodology, which I don't have time to go into now, but essentially it looked at the whole wide range of factors that could potentially influence women and girls' perceptions of safety in parks. So drawing on a whole range of existing literature from women-only areas, potentially, security, vegetation, activation, all these types of things, facilities. So we looked at this, and women and girls ranked and spoke in depth about what impacted their views and their safety perceptions. And it identifies areas where there is similarity in views amongst women and girls, but also areas where we're different. So we found that women and girls, we're not a homogenous group. We're not all the same. And we have different views and preferences about what might make parks feel safer spaces. And some types of interventions like lighting and so forth may therefore work better to increase access for some women and girls than they might do for others. So we aren't this homogenous group, and we do need to understand, what unites us, similarities that might make parks feel safer, but also areas where there is difference and what will work for some and not others. But we also found that there is a great degree of consensus and agreement amongst women. And our findings are reported in these 2 detailed reports, but I just want to draw out 5 themes that informed the new guidance that we created. So next slide, please. So we identified a number of areas of consensus, and the area of greatest consensus among women is that the presence of other women in parks makes them feel safer. So we are a positive signal of safety in these spaces. And there was a sense that women's presence fostered a kind of positive feedback loop. So it encouraged other women to use the space, as some of the quotes highlight here. So what we feel, this kind of highlights this really nice positive safety loop, where the single best thing that can be done to make parks feel safer spaces is to really make them as appealing and as welcoming to a diverse cross-section of women and girls as possible, to encourage women to use the park, who will then serve as this positive signal to other women that it's a safe space. But much like what Greenspace and Us projects has identified, women and girls told us actually that there is a lack of facilities and a lack of activities in parks that meet their diverse needs, their basic interests, and that current provision caters more for men and boys' needs and interests. So sense of safety is an issue, and part of that solution might be creating belonging. Next slide, please. So the second area of consensus and strong feeling among women was that well-used park spaces feel safer. And busyness was perceived as a particularly important element of a safe park for women and for girls, because it was often when you're on your own or felt that there weren't other people around, that it was an isolated space, that there wasn't the everyday passive surveillance, there were lulls in park use, and then where you'd feel more unsafe. And as such, women were telling us that they would plan their visits to coincide with busier times, avoid parks when there are lulls or at certain times, and schedule sometimes their visits when they knew there were regular activities going on. So this regularity was really important. So things like park run, as this quote suggests, that going on. When they knew there were going to be other people around, they might use the park not necessarily as part of park run, but actually coincide their visit when at this time. And there was also consensus that one of our statements was that organised activities, would they make you feel safer? And this was an area of agreement among women. And it was felt that organised activities enable them potentially to participate in activities that they may not do otherwise on their own due to safety concerns, but they also act and contribute towards the use of these spaces and the activation of these spaces that make them feel safer. Next slide, please. Something that came out particularly strongly in our research was that women and girls are constantly scanning their environment for potential threats, thinking about ways they might escape a difficult situation, thinking about those, you know, the Greenspace and Us example there of paths and football pitches and so forth. So how are we going to navigate these spaces? So women and girls you want the managers and the designers of these spaces really to see the park through their eyes and how they experience it. And the things that came out important for a number of women were being able to see a good distance and be seen, in relation to vegetation along main paths and in core areas of the park, keeping that well maintained, for sightlines. And for teenage girls, plenty of exits and escape routes were really important. And they were constantly feeling like they want to be trapped in certain spaces. And this has particular implications around multi-use games areas and other play spaces like that. Teenage girls also felt safer around the edges of these park spaces where they could see and be seen, but also escape. So thinking about the edges of parks and design was really important. But also women and girls would return. Some of their safety work was actually returning to familiar parks that they knew well. They knew the layout well and other things. And this would aid their sense of expectations of safety before they visit. And a number of girls advocated for familiarisation visits in order to do that. And then lighting did emerge as a strong issue for some group clusters of women, some clusters of girls, as a really important issue that would extend their use of parks late mornings and early afternoons. But for other women and girls, they were not using parks during the evenings, and they didn't feel that this would extend their use until essentially societal change and male behavioural change happened. Next slide, please. Ways of getting help in parks really mattered to women and girls. They prioritised more park staff and also potentially help points, but also active bystanders in the forms of people, volunteers, those working in cafes, walking their dogs, and other presence within parks. And for girls, it was also particularly important to have a gender balance and to have female park staff. Next slide, please. So a whole range of intersectional barriers also emerged within the study, and so I just wanted to highlight some of these here on the slide. For some women and girls, they felt at much more increased risk in public spaces and in parks of harassment or assault related to their aspects of identity, or that some of these aspects affected whether they felt that they were able to escape or defend themselves. So I think it's really important that we ensure that we are making changes with a diverse cross-section of women. Next slide, please. Women and girls overwhelmingly think that the message on them is for them to stay safe, for them to change their behaviour, and they really want this message to be changed. They want authorities, designers of these spaces, men and boys, to change their behaviour, and the focus to be on that. So whilst that is another wide issue, and I know we're considering design here, I also wanted to flag that up. So of course there is a lot that we need to do in terms of societal change, I think, in order to improve safety. But what our guidance seeks to address is this kind of inequality and opportunity to parks. So I'm going to hand over now to Susannah to take us through some of the principles of the guidance. Thank you.
Thank you, Anna. So yes, as Anna said, the next task with further money with an extra grant was to turn this into guidance, into actual practical steps that people can use to create safer parks. And as Anna said, this is very much a collaborative project between her, West Yorkshire Combined Authority, in its many and varied forms, with the university, with us, the Make Space for Girls, and crucially with Keep Britain Tidy, because they are massive influencers for parks this guidance will be a set of supplementary guidance for the Green Flag Awards, so that the safety of women and girls becomes part of the evaluation, which is really important. So next slide, please. And it wasn't just a load of people doing it. We consulted really widely, absolutely across the board. So it was incorporating ideas, genuine issues from a whole range of people, from women, from people like Secured by Design, who are issuing their own guidance about how to design for safety, Fields in Trust. It went out. We had a lot of conversations with a lot of people, and then the guidance went out to even more people. So we really hope it's taking into account a really diverse set of opinions and needs on how we do this, because the important thing about the guidance is it needs to be practical. It's really easy to write something that just goes, oh yes, we should do all these things, but parks have a limited staffing, they have limited budget. We could all design the perfect safe park with an infinite budget. So the aim was to create something that's realistic to use. So next slide, please. The guidance is grouped into 3 categories. I am going to whiz through this relatively fast because it is all in the guidance. The guidance is out there, you can read it, but I'm just going to give you a taster rather than going into terrible detail. Eyes on the park. The idea that having people in the park, having busy parks, is really crucial to a sense of safety. Awareness. Some of this is designing spaces so that women and girls feel safe, they can see around them. It's also about how you get to the park and a whole lot of other things. Inclusion is about, as Anna said, addressing the questions of intersectionality and making sure that everybody feels able to use the park in the broadest sense, and that everybody's views come to bear on the park, which is something that Make Space for Girls feels very strongly about. Next slide, please. So within those 3 themes, there are a range of principles, 10 in total. So eyes on the park, busyness and activation. So the more people you get in the park, the more people you get in the park. The more women you get in the park, the more women want to come to the park. It's straightforward, but there's some practical guidance. Staffing and authority figures. As Anna suggested, having women being part of the park's teams, but also bringing in other people. Food trucks are a kind of natural surveillance. There's all sorts of different things that can be done to bring more authority people into the park, which makes it feel safer. Awareness. This is one of the biggest issues, a whole lot of stuff in here. Visibility and openness, obviously being able to see where you're going, be able to feel seen is really important. Escape is also crucial. So there was one of the things I found most interesting about Anna's research is that teenage girls said they preferred to be on the perimeter of the park because it meant if there was trouble, they could get out more easily. That was a real revelation for me. And there's research as well that shows if you put in a walking and running path around the perimeter of a park, more women and girls use it. So that kind of thing as well. Being aware, in an ideal world, none of this would be necessary, but we're not in that ideal world next. Lighting is really important, and it's somewhere where we need a lot more research. We don't really know what works in terms of safety. People are trying things out, but it's where we really need to find out what works and don't work. But we spoke to some experts, and again, it has to be balanced against wildlife. There's also, it's an expensive thing, but there are some suggestions about how to do it better. And wayfinding and layout, as Anna said, a familiar park feels safer, feels more comfortable. So allowing women to see where they are both on a map, but also in terms of the layout of a park being visible is really important. Inclusion, there's all sorts of things in here. Belonging and familiarity. Again, the more you go to the park, the more that people like you go to the park, the safer the park feels. But there's a lot of interventions. Park design, it doesn't just have to be about the physical structure of the park. It can also be about activating the park, and we'll come on to that in a bit with some of the case studies, to bring more women into the park and to make it feel better. Image. Now, obviously, if a park feels unsafe, a park feels unsafe, but allowing women to develop familiarity, for example, by having a website that tells you where you can go, Access and location, as I've said, you can build the most beautiful park, but if you have to go through a dark subway to get there, that's rather limiting. And crucially, co-production engagement. So this is about doing things with women, not to women or for women, and not just the obviously, oh look, we're going to design something, can we show you 2 pictures? Getting, my watch has an opinion on that, getting people involved at every stage, getting women and girls groups onto the friends group of parks, going out and talking to people right at the start, not just going, oh, we're going to build a new something, going, what do you want from this place? And crucially, engaging with people who are not the users, because a lot of women and girls are not currently users of parks. And if you're just talking to the users, you're just going to embed the same inequalities. Next slide, please. So this is what it looks like in terms of the guidance. Really, so I was talking about the circular running and walking routes, practical pieces of guidance that people who are in any way involved in parks, whether that's councils, whether that's friends groups, whether that's people who just want to, create a particular space in the park, can do to make things better. So this is what business and activation looks like. Next slide, please. So visibility and openness. Again, some simple things. It's not prescriptive. We're not saying, oh, trees have to be 3 meters high, you need, shrubs have to be less than 1 meter high, all that kind of stuff. People obviously are experts in their own area, but it's a set of things to think about and ways of looking at it. So the idea that you are looking at your park through a slightly different set of eyes that may not be what you're expecting, maybe more how a woman and girl would look at the park. Next slide, please. So belonging and wayfinding and layout. Sorry, I've jumped ahead one in my head. Again, it's about encoding safety into design. So a hierarchy of paths, so you know where you're going, being able to see what's in front of you, all that sort of stuff is really crucial to helping women and girls feel that they can confidently go in a park and not be lost or trapped. Next slide, please. Belonging and familiarity. Now, there's all sorts of interesting things that come into this. Like I've mentioned the activations, but also, for example, statues and artworks. I looked at a park through Make Space for Girls where they had some facilities for boys, a gym called the Iron Warriors Gym, and then a large statue of a boxer. And that park did not feel welcoming to women and girls. So there's a sense of also just viewing the ambience. If you were a woman, would you feel this is a place for you? Let's put some more statues up. Let's rename the things. Also, if you've got a building and it's called the Cricket Pavilion, nobody's going to try and use it. If you call it the Community Hub, you don't have to rebuild anything, but more people are going to go, oh, maybe we can hold a yoga class in there. Maybe we can use it. So it's not trite, these things. They can make a real difference. Next slide, please. Co-production engagement. All sorts of pointers as to how this might happen. One of the things I learned about through this, and I find really interesting, is the Swedish designers have an idea of safety walks, where you literally just go around the park with a group of women and girls at twilight and say, how does this feel to you? And to get their lived experience. Really simple, really cheap, has the potential to make a whole huge difference. Next slide, please. So as well as principles, there are case studies. All sorts of things at all sorts of price points, frankly, and not all of them are things that we necessarily think people are going to go and recreate, but it's ideas and different ways of thinking about them. So next slide, please. Just one example, as I said, activation. In Wakefield, they did a whole set of events for women and girls across their parks, everything from kickboxing to TikTok walks for girls. And it brought women into the park who said they then felt more confident to use it afterwards. And, because it was a relatively small project, all we know is how they felt. Hopefully there was a knock-on effect that other women saw women just being in the park and thought, oh, okay, maybe this is not as bad as I thought it was. Next slide, please. Also, as I said, we know budgets are limited. It's not, not everyone can afford to make huge changes. So throughout the guidance, there are quick wins. which just give ideas of how small steps that parks can take that will make a difference, because you know, it doesn't always have to be a massive renovation project. Next slide, please. Oh, it's groaning because it's the video, isn't it? So yes, basically that's it. You can download the guidance on the Green Flag Award Resources Hub. It's also on the Make Space for Girls website. Please do, and please share it with everybody. That's what it's there for. There's a little video about the, I think we've run out of time for that. There's a little video about the guidance as well, which you will also find on the Green Flag Award website, which is great. Please do watch it. And thank you for having us.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Anna and Susannah. And please do pop the links in the chat there for people to find the long and the short guidance and the video as well. The guidance really is incredibly helpful, and it's beautifully laid out with some really handy signposting to the quick wins, as Susannah mentioned at the end there. So I would like to now introduce, we have Emily Fox from London Wildlife Trust and Anisa Saleh from Black Girls Hike to talk about a few different projects and programs that they've been running over the last few years. So over to you two.
Thanks so much, Louise. And yeah, that was a super useful presentation. I'm a Green Flag Award judge, so I'll definitely be using that guidance when I'm next judging some parks as well. So that's really useful. Yeah, could I have the next slide, please? So today, Anisa and I are going to talk to you a little bit about the work that we've been doing in partnership between London Wildlife Trust and Black Girls Hike. Really that kind of focuses on exploring and breaking down barriers to inclusion in nature and the outdoors for women and non-binary people of colour. You'll probably see some of the similar themes kind of emerging from the first two talks as well, but I think some of the stuff will be quite nuanced what we're talking about, because we're focusing specifically on young women and girls and non-binary people of colour. We're going to talk through some of the key learnings and themes that have emerged, including how well-being and the creative arts can be really useful tools for engagement and also rediscovering a kind of lost connection with nature. We'll also talk about our learnings from young people about their perception of nature conservation, for example, and how this in itself can be a barrier for getting involved, as well as how these perceptions link to attitudes around safety, relevancy, and also accessibility. And lastly, we'll finish with some information about related future work at both of our organisations as well. Next slide, please. Well, two slides. And next one, please. So I just briefly wanted to introduce both of our organisations, just so you kind of get an idea of who's involved. So I work for London Wildlife Trust. I am the head of youth programmes. But London Wildlife Trust in itself is a nature conservation charity in London. It's one of 46 wildlife trusts across the UK, collectively known as the Wildlife Trusts, and our aim is to protect the capital's wildlife and wild spaces and engage London's diverse communities through access to our nature reserves, through campaigning, volunteering, and also education. Next slide, please.
Hi everyone. So I'm Anisa. I'm working with Black Girls Hike. We're a community interest company that was founded in 2019, and you'll see from the slide here that we are about providing a safe space for Black women and cis and trans and non-binary women of colour to be able to access green spaces and take up a sense of connection and kinship in the natural environment. And so we're really about challenging the status quo in terms of that lack of representation that we tend to see in green spaces across the UK and internationally as well. And so our offer is a range of nationwide group hikes and walks, outdoor activity days that go into kind of blue space activities as well, and also training opportunities for our volunteers and members. So we have currently Can I just say, sorry, I think somebody's talking on a call, and if somebody could mute, it would be really helpful, because I'm finding that a little bit distracting. Thank you. So yeah, and then we're also looking to, we develop a range of partnerships. Again, we're focusing today on our partnership with London Wildlife Trust and some of the programmes that we've delivered alongside them. So yeah, that's a little bit about us. And the impact has been really quite significant in terms of that membership for Black women who are from a range of different backgrounds and different ages, who come together. They can self-organise walks, or they can join guided walks that are supported by our team. And like I say, that is growing quite exponentially in recent years. So over to the next slide, please.
Brilliant. Yeah, so over the last couple of years, we've delivered a range of different initiatives together that have explored young people's connection to nature, with a particular focus on young women and non-binary people of colour. So back in 2021, our Wild Walks project, supported by Natural England, brought our two organisations together. And this pilot project set us up really well to build a kind of programme that really looked at what young women of colour want, and those barriers that they're facing, and a lot of the activities sort of included or was centred around the 5 ways to wellbeing, and tackled topics such as representation, identity, and also safety in the outdoors. And it's worth noting as well that, you know, the environmental sector in itself is one of the second least diverse sectors behind agriculture in terms of its workforce, and that really does have an impact in terms of things like representation, and people feeling like they have role models within the workforce, within organisations like London Wildlife Trust, for example. Yeah, this pilot project, Wild Walks, then set us up really well to build a programme in a little bit more depth around these themes, which linked nature to the creative arts through the Arts Council England's Volunteering Futures Fund, which again brought together Black Girls Hike, London Wildlife Trust, as well as London Youth and Spread the Word, who are a kind of literacy agency for writers across London. And that project is called Nature Nurtures. And again, tackles those themes around well-being, identity, and also things like cultural heritage and that kind of sense of belonging within nature. And most recently, well, our Nature Nurtures project is still ongoing and until mid next year. But we recently completed the Seeding Change research project as well, which was also supported by Natural England and was in collaboration with another organisation called Wanderers of Colour. And that really aimed to comprehensively look at the ways to support young women and non-binary people of colour who we know are less likely to be accessing green spaces and who may not currently be taking part in practical nature conservation activities, and really look at what are the ways that we can overcome the negative perceptions of who wild spaces are for, gain more confidence in using the outdoors and improving kind of self-esteem, but also foster a bit more of a deeper sense of place and belonging, but also thinking about you know, becoming ready for pathway opportunities into the conservation sector as well. So that was a real deep dive piece, and hopefully we can do it justice by in the slides today. This is yeah, over 40 pages. Next slide, please. And next one, please. So first of all, just going to talk a little bit about Wild Walks, which is what kind of kicked off this partnership. And just to say, I think you can't see all of the key on the pie chart on there, but if the slides are being shared around, then I'll send an updated one. But we actually had 46 young women, so again, need to adjust that. 46 young women that joined a series of guided nature walks at London Wildlife Trust's Walthamstow Wetlands Nature Reserve in North East London. So the young women took part in guided meditation activities out in nature reserve, received mentoring from the Black Girls Hike team. Again, those mentoring sessions tackled topics around representation in the outdoors, identity, and also safety in the outdoors. We utilised the WHO 5 Ways to Wellbeing Index as part of to try and quantify the kind of impact on young people's health and well-being, even from these short sort of interventions, really. And as part of a pre-session survey, we asked young women to answer questions about their physical, mental health and well-being using that index. The answers to this were mixed. Some young women were experiencing more positive mental health than others, but overwhelmingly, after taking part in wild walks, all women reported feeling more calm and relaxed, and over 90% felt more cheerful and in good spirits and more active, vigorous and refreshed. In addition, 98% of young women learnt something new during the session as well, something new about nature, about the environment, about themselves. And 87% felt that their overall confidence and self-esteem improved after the session. And you can see just from the basic sort of session outline that I've put here, the sort of 4 main components of what those sessions look like. So really an opportunity to talk, to meet each other, lots of icebreakers and games, talking about those 5 ways to wellbeing, what each of those things meant to each person. A discovery element, so creating a safe environment for those young women to explore a new place, such as the wetlands, and also add that element of learning in there as well through spotting wildlife and species ID. An element of connect, so a time to kind of reflect through mindfulness and guided meditation, and then that mentoring element, which Black Girls Hike led on, really sort of drilling down into who is nature for, what does nature mean to you, what does good mental health and well-being mean to you, and as well as sort of tips on safety, different networks to join, and signposting to different resources. Next slide, please. You might have to click through a couple of times as animations on the next one with them all appearing. That's working? Yep, brilliant, thank you. So the importance of representation, role models, and feeling a sense of belonging was something that came up a lot from participants. So you can see some of the quotes here around having an inspiring female role model was really appreciated. Being able to connect with other young Black women in nature was really important, and also really echoes that point around rediscovery as well. So rediscovering a kind of lost connection with nature. Could you click through just so another box appears for me? Well, hopefully it can't. Anyway, what I was going to say is we also asked young women what they felt would make it easier for them to use the local green space, including nature reserves, and this through this kind of consultation highlighted again a lot of the themes that have already been talked about today around safety, increased awareness of green spaces that are safe, that is near to them, and also the need for organised groups and sessions which provide the opportunity to meet other like-minded people as well. Hopefully you can see some of those on there too. Next slide, please.
So I'll talk a little bit about Natures. So we're a year into this project with London Wildlife Trust. So we've partnered with them with support from Arts Council England, again with other organisations Spread the Word and London Youth, to develop a range of nature conservation training and volunteering opportunities, and giving young diverse people from across London to access London's greener spaces, and that has included some of the wildlife trust sites as well. So we will meet usually 5-6 times a year, allowing to go out and walk, to connect with nature. We get very much into nature IDing, developing an interest of local wildlife, and also using, again, a creative element to support that process as well. So that will include wellbeing activities and reflective exercises to allow young people to explore their sense of belonging in nature, and also in relation to each other. And that programme is aimed at 16 to 25-year-olds. And with the project so far, we've had quite a strong uptake of young women, that being around 77% being female, 18% were male, and 5% were non-binary. So the majority were 81% aged 21 and over, and they all came from a range of different backgrounds. So we'd had a relationship with these, but also those who'd never had accessed nature otherwise as well. 66% of young people were of colour, with 75% from minoritized ethnic communities. 43% live in the top 30% most deprived communities in England. So it's felt like that we're really able to reach a diverse range of young people, and that we're providing, again, a safe space for them to connect and to see people who look like them, people who reflect some of their values, and also their interest and passion for nature and conservation as well. So we've been able to generate a lot of discussion and ideas as to what changes we could make and how we can take up space in those green spaces to have more of a voice. And so at the end of the 12 months, the phase 12 months, we created, spread the word, took the lead on creating Nature's Anthology, which was a collection of poetry, photography, and we had a launch and a sharing of that earlier this year, which was pretty amazing in terms of really seeing that creative energy come out of those young people. They were really inspired by that process, and so we will continue to deliver those walks over the next 12 months, and we've got some more exciting opportunities around developing the leadership of those young people, so linking in with London Youth to look at different training opportunities that will support the team and ultimately support those young people to progress and move forward and take advantage of opportunities in the green sector in relation to jobs and training that may come up for them. So next slide, please. So some of the main things that people enjoyed, which I've already highlighted, was that ability to learn as well. So there was what's really stood out for me is that real eagerness and enthusiasm to learn about nature, and also kind of how we were able to create an inclusive space where people felt safe. So that was very much evidenced in some of the feedback that we've received. So diverse group of young people makes me feel welcome. I felt welcome because I feel like I don't know a lot about nature, but wasn't made to feel stupid. And I felt comfortable right at the beginning to get involved. It made me very happy to see Black women leading. So those were some of the impacts that we had, I've seen so far. So next slide, please. I'll hand back over to Emily.
Thank you. And the last piece of work that we just kind of want to talk about is Seeding Change. So our kind of deep dive research project. And this project represents a research phase that will feed into a pilot programme of supported outdoor volunteering activities that are safe, culturally sensitive, and also, most importantly, fun as well. So this project focused on young women and non-binary people aged between 18 and 25 who identify as being people of colour, with some who may also be part of a faith group as well. As mentioned before, these are young people who we know from research are less likely to be accessing green spaces and who may not currently be taking part in practical nature conservation activities. So over a course of 5 months, we worked with young women through a series of in-person consultation workshops, an online survey, one-to-one semi-structured interviews, and also putting some of that learning into action through delivering some pilot volunteering sessions. And the insights that have been gained throughout the course of this research project have been used to create a series of recommendations that are informing a whole host of different areas within London Wildlife Trust, which I'll talk about in our next few slides. And to make sure that outdoor activities, including volunteering, can be tailored to women and non-binary people of colour, to make sure that participation is more kind of inclusive and more accessible. One of the key things, and I think one of the real kind of eye-opening insights, was around when we asked the question simply, what does nature conservation mean to you? And this was a question asked to everyone who engaged with the project, whether that was through the survey or through the workshops. And the various responses to this question demonstrate the complicated relationship that some communities of colour have with the environmental sector as a whole, in particular nature conservation, that is shaped by wider experiences of exclusion. So through these conversations, themes of colonialism, extraction, elitism emerge from these discussions, and it's clear that a significant amount of trust building needs to be done to ensure that people of colour, and particularly those experiencing gender marginalisation, feel safe and welcome within the nature conservation sector. And as the in that question was also kind of put in context with themes of safety, relevancy and accessibility, which again have been touched on quite a lot in this webinar. And could I go to the next slide, please? Just, I'm conscious of time and all of those points in there. So we do have a full report that I think Louise has already shared on here, so that will kind of go into a little bit more detail around the insights around safety, relevancy and accessibility, a lot of which has already been touched upon today, around kind of co-production, ensuring that there are safe designated spaces for particular demographics, ensuring there's clean, accessible facilities, representative staff and workshop leads as well. But I just want to spend some time on this particular slide, just to touch upon again this kind of perception of nature conservation sector. So some young women shared that that despite being interested in volunteering in green spaces and with wildlife, that they couldn't imagine being part of the nature conservation sector themselves or itself, and many young people that we spoke to felt a kind of disconnection from nature, and a couple of them talked about how they felt that this was because their parents and grandparents didn't feel safe enough to kind of take them outdoors, and it kind of led to a bit of a chain of disconnect, and that they were wanting to go through a process of healing and rediscovering that connection with nature. And I think that's where having an organisation like Black Girls Hike, that kind of trust and being able to have those conversations in a kind of safe setting was really, really valuable. Some young people also brought up their own histories of colonialism as well, so sharing how narratives of conservation have historically been used to kind of disenfranchise Indigenous communities in the global south by displacing them from their land. So some really, really rich conversations that came out of this. So I think that bottom quote there talks about that feeling of that broken relationship with nature and that wider context. Many attendees also enjoyed having sessions dedicated specifically to women and non-binary people, and they shared that having these opportunities that were dedicated to their communities showed them that London Wildlife Trust was aware of the gap in accessibility and was making an effort to address it. And creating this space allowed them to kind of feel more safe and welcome, where otherwise, you know, in a space that would otherwise evoke sort of complicated feelings of kind of fear and isolation. So since the sessions were created with the specific communities in mind, the needs of specific target communities were considered within every aspect of the planning delivery rather than just being an afterthought. So some of the things that were talked about were around sort of factoring in prayer schedules into the sessions, and the need for sort of privacy when perhaps doing practical conservation, where some attendees wanted that sense of modesty and not to be sort of viewed by potentially male passers-by or anything like that. So it wasn't a case of them not wanting to do the activity, it was just about factoring in you know, an environment that made them feel safe, where they could actually participate in an activity in a way that, yeah, that suited them. Next slide, please. And back over to you, Anisa, to talk about future work.
Sorry, Anisa, could I just get you to maybe speed up a little bit, just because we're edging into the question time?
You're on mute as well, Anisa.
Oh,
I think you're still on mute.
There you go. I'm sorry. Just a quick roundup. That Black Girls Hike, we've got lots and lots of different opportunities happening. Check out our website. We've got lots of different activities, and we continue to build our relationships and partnerships. So yeah, there's that, and our youth programme, which is really, really exciting. We have become a Duke of Edinburgh provider, so we are launching Duke of Edinburgh for young people across Greater Manchester, which starts next week. And we have various training opportunities linking in with mountain training. We are a mountain training provider now, so we have lots of opportunities there that we're continuing to support our members with. So that's me, and you can always reach out to Black Girls Hike, and you'll find us out there. Over to you, Emily.
Yeah, very quickly, I've already talked about this, but a lot of the insights from all three of these projects are obviously factoring into our wider policy and strategy. So we're undergoing a kind of whole revamp of our volunteering strategy at the moment, taking into account all of the learning, and also linked to that, looking at creating a bit more of a history of conservation position statement for the organisation. So recognising those things that I've talked around about colonialism, land ownership, extraction, all of those things, and this feeling of elitism, and where London Wildlife Trust sits in all of that, and really kind of acknowledging that. So that's going to be a really interesting piece of work, I think, coming up in the next year, and hopefully more work in partnership with Anisa and the team as well. I think that's it, wrapped up.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Emily and Anisa. It's so interesting to hear about all the different projects and programs that you've been running, and I didn't want to cut you off because there's so many important and interesting points that you're making there. Could I invite you both to pop in any other links in the chat to any of the other reports or projects that are ongoing, if anyone has any further information that they'd like to seek? And could I open up any opportunities for people to raise their hand or pop their question in the chat? I think we've got about 7 minutes left for questions, so maybe about one question to each group of presenters would probably fit in that time. To start off, we've already had one question that I think was for Anna and Susannah from Taz. And that was, what methods were preferred for wayfinding? Were there any views raised on signage, information, language and style, for example?
The short answer, yes, I'm visible. The short answer to that question is no. The longer answer is, I think that's an area where engagement is really important, because what's right for one park isn't going to be right for another park. You know, it really is quite location specific. There are some sort of core principles in the guidance in terms of having maps available is really important. Thinking about online presence, and making, like I said, making the hierarchy of paths clear both in signage and visibly through the way they're designed. But beyond that, in terms of language and style, it really, I think the only way to find the right answer for a particular place is, or the best way, is through engagement.
Just to add to that, one of the case studies or small examples is Queen Elizabeth Olympic Park in London, and they've done a little experiment looking at signage and wayfinding in relation to not just adding distances, but also kind of walking times between routes, and also signing the lit routes as well through spaces.
Wonderful, thank you. I believe we have Guy Keating. Do you want to come off mute and ask your question? I can see your hand is up, and then we'll invite Saleh afterwards.
Sure, thank you, Louise. Yeah, just I made just one brief comment there that it's really good to see lots of that, you know, really beneficial social inclusion work and like better design and management standards for green spaces, so that it's holistic for all. But it was Anna's presentation that really got to the crux of the matter for me. And in essence, you know, that indicates that women and girls feel unsafe in green spaces in the presence of men and boys for a variety of reasons. And yeah, just I don't know if this is an option. I got quite careful about how I phrase this because I appreciate it's a sensitive subject. But I just wondered if all the women on this call could use the react function and the thumbs up to just to give me a flavour if you've genuinely felt uneasy or threatened in a green space environment by the presence of men. I just, it'd be quite a good straw poll.
Do you want to pop your hands up or press the react thumbs up button? I suppose might be a good one if anyone wants to.
I think what's worth noting here as well is that particularly when you talk to teenage girls, their concept of safety is not the same as grown-ups. It's not just about not being attacked, not being raped. It's about feeling welcomed. It's about not feeling disapproved of. So it's quite interesting that all of those things feed into what they see as a safe space as well. This very much came through in the Oxford work as well. There's also a sense of feeling provisional in spaces, that you're only allowed, this came through very clearly with the girls from Oxford, that you're only allowed a space if somebody else isn't using it.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting to see the number of thumbs up there. So it's a kind of common theme, and like I do believe that actually finding solutions to these issues, while welcome, actually the crux of the issue is that young boys need to be engaged with about equality and sexual equality and everything that goes with that from a very young age. And I'll just give you, just briefly, I have a teenage son, and his part of his kind of friend group involves 5 teenage girls. And they all go out together and they have a great time and they recreate in green spaces and all the rest of it. And I think it's because from a young age, within the school curriculum in Scotland, in the primary schools and the high schools, they have a little module about equality and social inclusion and sexual equality. And, you know, optimistically, I think that that's where the genesis of change will come about. And I think, you know, that also the kind of mainstream media has a really strong role to play in this, because, you know, like women's elite sport now is given equal precedence on the BBC. You know, even 3 or 4 years ago, you would have never seen live female rugby on the TV, and now you do, and that can only be a good thing for, you know, encouraging young women to engage in formal sport and also to kind of recreate in the outdoors. So hopefully we're seeing the sort of beginnings of the seeds of change, you know.
I think I agree. But I think from a make space for girls rather than necessarily from a safer parks perspective, there are huge things that can be done with design. Because, for example, the most common facility for teenagers is a muga, you know, a fenced pitch. It's got high fences, narrow entrances. It's full of boys. Girls are never going to feel safe, you know, in something like that, not in the next 20 or 30 years. It's, you know, so we can design things better as well as trying to change the culture.
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
oh no, go on, Anna.
No, I was just going to pick up on there. I think Susannah's covered it nicely in the sense that there is the judge, the disapproval, the kind of concept of safety was anything between feeling uneasy to feeling endangered. So there is this kind of wide spectrum of what it means. And for some, that is about strangers, and girls and women are socialized to fear unknown men and react to incidents of harassment in parks. And that was not just from unknown men, but sometimes it was pushing the boundaries between their peers and their friends as well. And so there is a whole kind of variety of things, but we did look at lone men particularly. Women are seeing if there are signs of safety associated with that. Is the man walking your dog? What are they doing? It's not partly just their presence. Are they participating in an activity? Are they with other family members and so forth? So constantly looking for these kind of safety signals around their presence and behaviour, and reading strangers, and the ability to know whether one male stranger is benign and non-threatening or is not is quite a challenge.
Is Sally, are you there? Sally Jervis?
Question. Hiya, yeah, can you hear me? Hello?
Yep, I can hear you.
Okay, great. The question that I wanted to ask actually follows on from that really well. So something that I particularly picked up on was how women often feel that the obligation is with them to change their behaviour to stay safe in these sorts of environments. Like there's lots of phrases that are always thrown around: don't walk alone in isolated spaces, these sorts of things. And I wondered in your sort of design process whether any of you have considered the idea of actually opening up this talk to include the other demographics that are potentially who are making women feel unsafe in these spaces. So particularly something that I was thinking about with the whole signage sort of thing was maybe and the online access, just educating and more information to other demographic groups like men and boys in terms of sort of like, keeping your distance, don't overtake. These things are thrown around quite a lot in society. They are wider societal issues, but in terms of bringing them into the design when you are designing these spaces, just to make women feel more comfortable. I feel if there was a signage board saying like how to make women feel more safe in these spaces, and then just outlining certain scenarios or things that people can do, might be really helpful.
Does anyone want to come in here? Maybe someone that we haven't heard from in the discussion, or otherwise I'll open it up wider. Lizzie, Anna, Susannah, anyone?
Anisa? Yeah. I was going to say we made some visual posters of what women and girls felt, and one of the things Susannah said is actually it'd be great if these went up in male locker rooms or in certain spaces. So we do have posters about how women and girls felt that were kind of designed to be engaging a wider audience. So I can send those. I'll put the link to those in the chat. So if you want to have copies of those, welcome to send those. And we were thinking, it would be great to have those in different male environments as well.
Yeah, so I just thought there's a lot of information out there about advice about what you shouldn't do, or like, around keeping women safe, but there needs to be more out there of like more guidance of what men and boys can do. Do you know what I mean? Because I bet a lot of them don't know. They want to make women feel more safer in these spaces, but they don't actually have the guidance to do so, and they perhaps feel awkward about, they don't know if they should approach, shouldn't approach, like what sort of thing. So like maybe getting a survey on how men could make women feel safer in these spaces, and then actually having some real guidance there put in place to make people feel more comfortable about these situations might be helpful. That was, thank you.
There's some good work being done both I know of schemes in Chelmsford and Northumbria but I believe there are others on active bystander training, which is sort of the next step for that, you know, actually, and you know, hopefully that can cascade down. You can train people to train others to, you know, step beyond not being a problem and into actively making spaces safer.
Thank you.
Perfect, thank you. I think Kerry or Elizabeth, do we have time for one more question, or should we wrap up? I'm aware it's past.
I think it's quite okay to carry on a few more moments, Louise, just because I think the conversation is quite rich. So if there's another question, that can be facilitated.
Perfect. I'll go to one in the chat. I think it was directed to Emily and Anisa. You mentioned about the element of fun and the importance of that. Could you give us some information on how you managed to achieve that? Oh, did I cut out there?
Anisa, do you want to go first?
Yeah, I can speak to that. A lot of my background has been directly working with young people, so in youth work and in a range of different settings. And so building on a lot of resources, tools and communication in order to build those relationships and find out what young people want. So I think it's, you know, we have to do our work in terms of finding out what is current for young people, what activities they enjoy, and keeping things light. And get to know young people, get onto, you know, find a way in to get onto their level, you know, being open, you know, sharing a little bit of yourself as well, I think can really kind of build rapport and trust. And so, yeah, I think what's really interesting, that's something really important I'd like to kind of comment on, is that when we bring people together, not just young people, but when we bring people together in nature, those barriers tend to dissolve a lot quicker. When we provide conditions for a safe space where people can come together, nature can hold us a lot more than you might do in four walls. And so that I find is a really powerful element to the sessions that we facilitate. And so young people's barriers come down, they feel safe, then they are more willing to engage and participate. So they'll take up the activities, they'll give it a try. They don't feel shy, they don't feel stupid because the conditions have been set right. So if we can, you know, do work around, you know, those setting the group work, can just pay hugely in terms of opening up those activities to be fun and engaging.
Wonderful, thank you so much. Lizzie, did you want to come back and that?
Yeah, I just wanted to add a bit and maybe invite Nafeesa to comment on this, because she's the one with first-hand experience. But one of the things that we've been talking about a bit is how the work that that's happened in Oxford could influence the way that youth work is delivered, because the traditional youth club is an indoor space with a pool table, a what do you call it, you know, like games, computer games, and then a, you know, a tuck shop or something like that. Certainly what it was like when I was a teenager, and from what I hear, the kind of standard model hasn't necessarily changed a lot. And what Nafeesa tells me, and I'm sorry, I'm going to stop chatting and maybe ask you to pick this up, Nafeesa, is that when you run those sessions in an outdoor space, it's just completely different. I don't know if you wanted to comment on that, Nafeesa.
Yeah, so I'm going to think about several examples over the past 10 years in the time that I've been working delivering youth work in Oxford. We had a young art and a local area in Oxford, quite a deprived area, and it was in a youth typical youth setting, hall, got a kitchen, got a pool, got a like to it, that kind of probably was. And what we saw there was a real.
I'm not sure if that's my connection or if Nafeesa's cutting out for everyone else there.
I can't hear her either.
Like, is that any better?
Sorry, Nafeesa, we're struggling to hear you on our end. Perhaps if we're able to pick that up in another moment, if your connection gets a little bit better. I'll pass over to the. Sorry, Nafeesa, I think we missed you there. While we wait to get Nafeesa back, can I pass over to Louisa Aspden, who has her hand up for another question?
My hand is actually up. I think it's not me. Oh, it is. I'm very sorry about that.
No
it's
problem.
Excellent presentation.
In that case, I'll read one more question from the chat. So
I don't know about everybody else, but I've lost Louise. Can anybody say if you can hear Louise? Because I've lost Louise.
I've definitely lost her, yeah.
Right, okay. I think she was going to go to another question, but I don't know which one she was thinking of going to.
Can I say something very quickly? Because somebody said something
Yes.
about pitches, and this actually links in two things. Because one of the things that came out very strongly from working with the girls in Oxford is because their local, the park that we were talking most about is actually full of football pitches. And when I was saying about them feeling that they had a tenuous hold, if you mark out a strip of grass with lines, that means that somebody who comes along with the ball gets priority. So if they sat down and took up the space, the person with the ball, spoiler alert, not often a girl, would have priority over them. And they felt that pitches were not good provision. Now, with Make Space for Girls, we've just been analysing some rather interesting hidden statistics on pitches. And I can tell you that 90%, so, okay, girls do more sports in organised teams than informally. So this is the best case scenario. And I've counted all mixed teams as being utterly mixed. And trust me, they're not. The absolute best case scenario, 10% of pitch uses is girls. So these huge acres of space are basically man spreading on a huge scale. And even if girls football quadruples as a result of the Lionesses, that's going to make the tiniest difference. The gap is so big that girls football would have to increase by 2,000% in order to make it equal. So we need to think about the priority we put on pitches versus other stuff. Also, just very quick, we did a survey of the summer. Usage of Moogers and skate parks is not much better. Actually, for Moogers, it's slightly worse. So we're building acres and acres of stuff that is just used by boys. 90% of the facilities are 90% used by boys.
Thanks, Susannah. I think that's a really good thing to end on. Louise, can you hear me? Because we can't hear you.
Yeah, sorry about that.
Oh, you're back
again.
Brilliant. I'll hand back to you. Just.
Okie doke. So I think that was a nice point that Pippa was saying that we should end on. So before we leave, I'd just like to signpost to a few other organisations that you could look up in your own time. This is just a flavour of some women and girls outdoor adventure and play and sports organisations. So do look out for what's on the horizon. And thank you very much for joining and letting me be your MC for today. I'll hand back over to Pippa to wrap up.
Thanks very much. Before you all whiz off for your other meetings or lunch or whatever you've got planned for next, I would ask you to complete the feedback form. The feedback form will be in the chat very shortly. It only takes a couple of minutes and it's really useful to us. We do take it seriously. We read it, we analyse it, we have a good look at it and we react to your feedback. So here's your chance to influence what the Outdoor Recreation Network is doing and what we've done so far. And if I can just go to the next slide. Next slide, please. Please keep your eyes open for our next annual online expert lecture. So I'm finding it difficult to get my words out there. and for the Outdoor Recreation Network 2024 conference in Ireland. So please start asking whoever pays for your bills that you'd really like to come to Ireland next April. It will be fabulous. It will be over a couple of days, as our Outdoor Recreation Network conferences are, and an opportunity to hear what our Irish colleagues have been doing, which is a really different scenario than it is from the ones that many of us face. So I really encourage you to come. So thank you very much for participating. Thanks for the speakers. Thanks to Louise for chairing. And thank you hugely to the Secretariat for making it work. And thank you to all for your comments and chats and questions and for participating in the webinar. I hope you found it useful and that you find that you can use all that information that's available. We will be posting the webinar on the Outdoor Recreation Network YouTube channel, so you'll get a link to that. And all the information will be embedded in that. So thanks very much, and I'll say goodbye.